I've come back from the future to warn you that if you don't subscribe to SSJ, your future is grim. Ready for Resident Evil Requiem? Before we step into the nightmare again, before February 27th arrives, and of course that had to be after Valentine's Day, there's something you need to ask yourself: are you truly ready to play Resident Evil Requiem? Because this game represents something that isn't just another sequel, but it is history, trauma, and the weight carried by survivors who have died a long time ago. And when the trailers dropped, many of us expected Capcom to push forward a new character, which they are, Grace Ashcroft. However, it looks like we're going to be offering a slower, more intimate perspective where you can play it in more of a survival horror type gameplay, similar to Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Village, where it's less action and more of a vulnerable human being. But then just like that, I saw the chainsaw, Leon, that roundhouse kick, and suddenly there he is, a man shaped by catastrophe. And what shocked fans even more was the image of Leon returning to the Raccoon City Police Department, a place that, according to everything we knew, especially after Resident Evil 3 and the Resident Evil 3 remake, Raccoon City was basically nuked. So it's kind of interesting how we're returning back to the Raccoon City. Maybe it wasn't nuked, or maybe that was faked. But from what we saw at the end of Resident Evil 3, Jill Valentine and Carlos narrowly with their lives, like they just barely managed to escape Raccoon City as it was about to blow up. And the sacrifice that forever scarred survivors like Jill Valentine. How do we get here? So to understand Resident Evil Requiem, we do have to go back, and I'm gonna go ahead and list some games and a little bit of history in between the games and why you should play these games to kind of get you prepared for Resident Evil Requiem. So the first one, many people will always try to bring up playing and starting out with Resident Evil 2 Remake first, but no. In my opinion, you definitely need to start off with Resident Evil 1. I recommend the Resident Evil 1 Remake from the GameCube that they remastered on PlayStation 4 and Xbox. Long before Leon ever put on the uniform, the nightmare began in a mansion where it's claustrophobic in its hallways with limited ammunition, and the slow realization that something bigger was always happening behind the scene. There's a lot of rot of the Umbrella Corporation, where it first unveils itself, experiments, betrayal, bioweapons, and even though Leon isn't present, it's the world that sets up later that is built from this disaster, and it's something that I've always loved. I love the subtle connections, like the famous terminal login referencing Ada, so that kind of ties together some threads for the universe to come later on. Fixed cameras, the ink ribbons, the deliberate pacing, it forces patience from many players, and it is their first lesson in fear. So obviously now, right after 1, you move on to Resident Evil 2. So Resident Evil 2 first comes in the night where everything collapsed. Leon arrives in town as a rookie officer, hopeful but untested. Within hours, he's navigating a graveyard disguised as a city. Inside the police department, terror takes many forms. The relentless footsteps of Mr. X, or the Lickers just creepingly sneaking through the hallway with their screeching sounds that they make, or even just the regular zombies that you see, and some zombie crows that might try to attack you randomly. The tragic mutation of William Burkham alongside Leon is Claire Redfield, who happens to be Chris Redfield's sister, younger sister. She's also a protagonist with Leon Kennedy, and they're trying to figure out how to desperately make sense of this chaos. So that kind of explains the Resident Evil universe a little bit more, while kind of bridging the gap from previous games. Every hallway, every desperate gunshot, every narrow escape is shaping the agent he will soon become. So the next game you want to definitely play after Resident Evil 2, I say definitely go for the Resident Evil 4 remake, because we're kind of falling in line with the remake. So you're going to go after Resident Evil 2 remake, you're going to go to the Resident Evil 4 remake, and this is going to be years later, where Leon is no longer the frightened rookie. He's trained, precise, efficient, but experience comes at a cost, where he's sent on a rescue mission to rescue the president's daughter. He uncovers a new horror, the religious faction known as Los Illuminados. Here Leon moves like someone who's already died once before. Confident, yes, but never untouched by memory. And then of course, after you finish Resident Evil 4 Remake, I definitely recommend wholeheartedly playing the original Resident Evil 4, where the energy is different, faster, more arcade-like, proudly video game in its design. For many fans, this is their introduction to Leon as an action icon, and even today, I still go back to the Mercenaries sometimes and play as Albert Wesker, because because it keeps me coming back. The remake may modernize the horror, but foundation remains legendary. Now, after you finish both Resident Evil 4s, you're gonna go ahead and move on. I know this is a little different. You're gonna move on to Resident Evil Biohazard, aka Resident Evil 7. After years of the explosive action where the series pulled back, we are finally brought back to the tighter spaces, less control, more vulnerability in the Baker estate, which does feel uncomfortable in a way where few games manage to be. Jack Baker becomes a relentless force hunting you through the halls, and I'll be honest, after his arc, the momentum dips quite a lot for me, but the tone shift is crucial, and that beginning part really was great. It reminds us that Resident Evil works best when its survival is uncertain, and if Grace follows this design philosophy for Requiem, players will definitely need to be ready for that tension.
Finish this, you and I.
All this for a child who isn't even here.
What the hell?
And then right after Resident Evil 7, you're obviously going to go on to Resident Evil Village, because it's the sequel to Resident Evil 7 that kind of still gets you used to that. Similar to what I said about Resident Evil 7, get you used to that kind of gameplay. You can switch to the third-person perspective if you want to, if you play Resident Evil Village, the updated version on the PS5. So that's good. So that's kind of where they got that from Resident Evil Village, doing that with Grace Ashcroft. And I think you can do it with Leon, where you can switch between first person and third person. The towering presence of Lady Demestra, the gothic architecture, the dread, it's phenomenal. Later chapters experiment wildly, where some players love them. For me, I think the experience was the best during the beginning half of the game, all the way up until you have to leave the castle after defeating Lady D. So now this is extra credit. Not everyone will go this far, but I think definitely if you're a hardcore Resident Evil fan like me and you just kind of want more lore, definitely play Resident Evil Code Veronica, because I mean, it doesn't really have too much to do with Leon or Requiem, but you are playing as Claire again, who you did play as in Resident Evil 2 with Leon, and there is a reference. There's some connective tissue where Claire continuing the fight, Leon does get acknowledged, and that does expand the world just a little bit when she's talking about sending some documents to him. And then last but not least, Resident Evil 6. So I know Resident Evil 6 is kind of like a whatever game. I personally think Resident Evil 6 is one of the worst Resident Evil games, but the gameplay is fun, especially if you do the co-op. It does take a long time though. It is going to be a long time to get through. You do get to reunite with Sherry Burkham, who was in Resident Evil 2, who we do know will possibly be making an appearance in Resident Evil Requiem. And it's just nice to see how long these scars have existed. And it may not be everyone's favorite chapter. It definitely isn't mine, but it is the combination of the toll of survival for everybody. So definitely play Resident Evil 6, even if it's just Leon's chapter, because Leon does take a little bit of his appearance from 6, and he does look a little slightly older from his 6 variant, so that's going to be quite interesting. And it gives you more on Leon's trauma and what he's going through, him having to find more survivors, but he can't save them all, and him having a new partner, Helena Harper. When Leon definitely walks around the ruins of memory and Grace steps into the danger, when old sins refuse to stay buried, you'll understand why it matters, because you were there through the mansion, through the city, through the cults and families and the wars. Resident Evil 27 isn't just another release, but it's reckoning. And I'll be there day one, diving in, streaming, taking theories, talking about theories, uncovering every secret. So make sure you're ready too. If you like this video, give it a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll talk to you later.